As coronavirus vaccines are being distributed, Congress is still debating what a next round of stimulus should look like. Today, a bipartisan group of senators led by West Virginia's Joe Manchin and Utah's Mitt Romney will release the text of their $908 billion coronavirus proposal. The relief package has been split into two separate bills because of disagreements among lawmakers. The first bill includes $748 billion for the Paycheck protection program, unemployment insurance, and vaccine distribution, among other major issues. That proposal has bipartisan support. The other bill includes $160 billion in state and local aid, as well as a liability shield to prevent lawsuits by employees if companies force them to work in unsafe COVID conditions. Some Republicans back this measure, along with Senator Manchin. Democrats support the local aid, but are balking at that liability shield. For more on the impact these negotiations are having on Americans, I want to bring in Heather Long in Washington. She's an economics correspondent for the Washington Post. Heather, welcome. Great to have you with us. So I want to talk a little more about what's in these proposals. The $748 billion bill has just about unanimous support. Do economists believe that that is enough to get us through the next few months?
The short answer is no, but they also say something is better than nothing at this point. It's clear that there is a dire need for aid for small businesses and for the unemployed, and of course to help keep schools safe and get these vaccines out. So that's why you've seen in the last few weeks a number of economists who've come out and prominently said that they think that something like this should pass, even though they would prefer to see a bill that's over $1 trillion, closer to about $1.5 trillion. It's better to get something going now because you can always pass more later.
Right. And of course, the Paycheck protection program appears to be a major piece of this deal. Based on your reporting, did the program accomplish its goal of giving the wide relief to small businesses that they desperately need?
It worked really, really well for businesses that got it. There were two big problems with the Paycheck protection program. Number one is it only lasted for a few weeks. So those small businesses that got it in April or May or June, that money was gone by the end of the summer. And of course, they're still struggling again as we see more shutdowns happening across the country once again as COVID cases spike. So that money just didn't last very long. The second issue is even more complicated, and that is you had to apply, and most of the time you had to apply through a local bank. And right or wrong, a lot of really small businesses, particularly minority-owned businesses, were more or less shut out of that process. The banks prioritized bigger clients they had longer-standing relationships with, and so that's why a number of small businesses say they were basically locked out of the program, which is obviously not what we wanted to see. There's hope in this new bipartisan bill. They have restricted the money only to small businesses that have fewer than 300 employees, so we shouldn't see some of those larger steakhouse chains and larger hotel chains that managed to sneak in and get money in the first round would hopefully be excluded by this process if it passes this bipartisan deal.
And then, of course, there's the second $160 billion part of the bill focusing on local aid that does not have universal support. Do economists believe that getting this money to states and cities is necessary right now? And do they see it as worth backing, even with this liability shield that's not popular among Democrats?
There's definitely overwhelming support for some aid to state and local, and you even see folks like George W. Bush's chief economist, Glenn Hubbard, has come out in support of this, among other advisors on the Republican side. And the reason is you simply have to look at the jobs data that comes out every month. We are still seeing large job cuts in state and local government. So for instance, in local education, we have almost 700,000 fewer teachers and local education teachers aide positions that are filled this November versus November 2019. Nobody wants to see those cuts. It's stuff that impacts families across the country. And so that's why you see so many people, particularly economists, saying, come on, Congress, pass at least this modest amount to ensure that those cuts don't get worse this winter and we don't have more people laid off just as we're trying to see the economy pick back up. You make an interesting point. Obviously, Republicans, particularly Mitch McConnell, are saying, sure, we'll give you some of that state and local aid money if you do this liability shield. The liability shield has been a very sticky point for months now. It all comes down to the details. Over the weekend, there was a lot of debate about what is gross negligence. So this idea is when liability shield, would exempt companies or hospitals or schools from being sued if employees or customers catch the coronavirus while they're there. Of course, we have seen places like meatpacking plants and some retirement communities that have had extensive outbreaks. So do you exempt them? Is there some sort of threshold that you would have to cross where it's so bad that you should be allowed to be sued? These details matter, and that's what's being debated right now.
The devil is in the details, as they say. So, Heather, what doesn't this bill include that economists are saying is absolutely necessary right now? For example, do they believe Congress needs to pass stimulus checks?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's obviously one of the big sticking points. And interestingly, you see both a Republican and a Democrat coming out in support of that. So Senator Bernie Sanders on the left, and then on the right, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, a Republican from Missouri, have tried to put in at least a $600 stimulus check before we did $1,200 in the spring. Hugely popular program. 160 million Americans received this check. I talk to unemployed people every day. They say it was, by and large, that was their greatest lifeline in the spring and summer. So it's very popular, but of course it's very costly. And you can see Republicans trying to keep the cost of this bill under $1 trillion. So as soon as you add those checks in, you way blow over $1 trillion on this package. So something else has to be cut. What are you going to cut in the package? That's a big sticking point. I would also say, important to point out, there is some money in this bipartisan package for rental assistance and for public transit, but there's not a lot. And there's a lot of fear that as the economy reopens in the spring, we begin to get people back to work, how are they going to get there if these subway systems and metros and trains and buses, at the moment, many cities, including where I am in Washington, D.C., have proposed cutting weekends, cutting the number of trains, putting the number of buses in half. This would really hamper our economy, and I think there's a lot of fear that there just is not enough dollars here to help public transit.
All right. Well, Heather Long, thank you so much for explaining some of the finer points to us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.